They say you can feel the storm before it hits, that some part of your body knows before your brain catches up. I guess I missed the warning signs. Or maybe I just did not want to see them. My name is Michael Hayes. I am 42 years old, born and raised in Austin, Texas, and for the past 15 years, I have worked as a senior logistics coordinator for a regional shipping company. It is not glamorous, but it is steady, honest work. And I always believed that steady and honest were the cornerstones of a marriage. My wife Vanessa is 38. Beautiful in that effortless way that turns heads without trying. And until that Tuesday morning, I thought we were solid. The house was quiet when I woke up, which was nothing unusual. I'm an early riser, the kind of man who likes his first cup of coffee before the sun stretches over the rooftops. I padded downstairs expecting to find Vanessa in the kitchen, hair pulled up, phone in one hand, sipping her oat milk latte in the other. It was our little routine. Me brewing the strong stuff, her sipping the fancy kind. But that morning, the air felt different. Not tense, not loud, just hollow. On the kitchen counter sat a folded sheet of paper. For a second, I thought it might be a grocery list or a quick reminder about her afternoon Pilates class. But when I picked it up, I recognized her handwriting. Perfect loops, the kind of penmanship you almost do not see anymore. 4 lines. That was all it took to end a life we had built over nearly 2 decades. I am done wasting my best years on someone who cannot keep up. I have found someone worth my time. No explanation, no signature, no goodbye. Just a message as cold as the granite countertop it rested on. I stood there for a long moment, holding the note like it might change if I just kept reading it over. I kept waiting for the punchline, for the part where she admitted it was some twisted joke. But the silence in that kitchen was louder than any fight we had ever had. My first emotion was not sadness. It was not even confusion. It was this slow, simmering anger, the kind that starts in your gut and works its way into your bones. She had not just left me, she had dismissed me, reduced me to a placeholder she could step over on her way to something she thought was better. I set the note down and stared at the empty chair where she should have been. There was a lipstick-stained coffee mug in the sink, still damp from her last rinse, and I realized she had been planning this for longer than I could admit. Part of me wanted to call her, demand an explanation, hear her say out loud the words she had hidden behind ink. But another part, the part that would eventually save me, decided to stay quiet. If she thought I could not keep up, she was about to learn I was capable of far more than she ever gave me credit for. That was the moment I knew. This was not going to be just a story about heartbreak. This was going to be the start of something she never saw coming. By noon that same day, my phone started buzzing like it had developed a life of its own. At first, I thought it might be friends checking in. Maybe someone from work calling about a delivery issue. But the screen told a different story. Fraud alerts, declined transactions, overdraft warnings. Each notification was like a hammer strike, one after another, until my hands felt numb from holding the phone. I opened the banking app and stared at the red numbers flashing in my face. Vanessa had not just left me. She had burned the financial ground behind her. Every joint credit card we had was maxed out, over $60,000 in charges. The transaction history read like the itinerary of someone living a life I could never afford. Luxury handbags from boutiques in New York, first-class airline tickets to places I had never heard her mention, and resort bookings at properties that charged more per night than I made in a week. She had gone on a spree, not over days, but hours. It was like the moment she walked out the door, she decided to drain every drop she could from what we had built. Then I saw something that made my stomach twist. She had even tried to pull cash advances from my business account, the one that was only in my name and tied to my job. That account was my safety net, the one I used for payroll emergencies and supply orders. The bank had blocked the attempt, but the fact that she had even tried told me everything I needed to know. This was not just a breakup. This was a calculated strike meant to cripple me in every way possible. I sat at the kitchen table, the note she had left earlier still sitting nearby, and scrolled through the list of transactions again. Each one was like a breadcrumb trail of greed and spite. Designer sunglasses in Los Angeles, spa packages in Miami, jewelry stores in Chicago, It was like she had picked the map of the country and tried to spend her way across it. My pulse was slow, but the anger was building, steady and cold. She had not just walked away from our marriage. She had declared war. I knew I could call her, scream at her, demand answers. But something in me shifted that afternoon. I remembered the way she wrote those words in her note, as if she were stepping into a better life without looking back. If she thought she was walking away clean, she was wrong. This was not going to end with me sitting here broke and blindsided. I was not going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me beg. No, this was going to be handled differently. I closed the banking app, set my phone down, and took a long breath. If Vanessa wanted to play games, she had just chosen the wrong opponent. And as far as I was concerned, the first hit had been landed. The next one would be mine. That evening, just as the sun was dipping low and painting the living room in a strange amber glow, my phone lit up again. This time, it was not a bank or a credit card company. It was Richard, Vanessa's father. He is 67 years old, a tall, proud man who built a small but thriving auto parts business from scratch. He is the kind of man who still believes in a firm handshake and paying his debts on time. We had always been polite with each other, even friendly on good days. But there was something different in his voice when I answered. It was sharper, colder, as if he had already been carrying bad news before he even dialed my number. "Michael," he said slowly, pausing after my name like he was choosing every word with care. "Did Vanessa tell you about the partnership account?" The question caught me off guard. I had no idea what he was talking about. My mind went through every account I knew of, every shared expense, but this was new territory. "No," I said finally. "I have never heard of it." "What partnership account?" That is when he told me. Years ago, Richard had set up a joint account between himself and Vanessa. It was meant strictly for business expenses related to a side project she had convinced him to try. Importing specialty car parts. He admitted it was also a way to give her some financial responsibility, a chance to show she could manage money wisely. He had kept it quiet, thinking it was their private arrangement and not something that needed to involve me. But now that account had a problem. A big one. Richard's tone grew heavier as he explained, over the past few months, there had been large withdrawals, much larger than the usual operating costs. At first, he assumed they were just unusual supply orders or deposits for bulk shipments. But when he looked closer, the paper trail did not match any invoices or business activities. "Michael," he said, lowering his voice, "these withdrawals are not business expenses, and they are not mine." I felt a slow, sinking weight in my chest. "Are you saying they are hers?" I asked. There was a pause, and then a short, grim answer. "I am saying she is the only other person with access." It was strange. Even after the note she left me that morning, even after the tidal wave of fraud alerts and credit card charges, some part of me still wanted to believe she would not cross certain lines. But hearing it from her father made it real in a way nothing else could. Vanessa had not only betrayed me, she had gone after her own family's trust. Richard sighed on the other end of the line, the kind of sigh that carries both anger and disappointment. "We need to meet at the bank tomorrow," he said. "I think it is time we both see exactly what she has been doing." That evening, after the chaos of the day had started to fade into a dull, steady hum in my head, the phone rang again. I almost did not answer. I had already spent hours talking to banks and card companies, explaining charges I had not made, listening to hold music that seemed designed to grind your patience into dust. But when I saw the name on the screen, Richard, I picked up. Richard is Vanessa's father, 67 years old, the kind of man who can fix a carburetor with one hand and hold a conversation about market trends with the other. He has run a small but successful auto parts business for decades, a man whose word has always meant something. We had never been close in the way a father and son-in-law sometimes are, but there had always been respect. The voice I heard on the line that night was not the same one I was used to. It was colder, sharper, carrying a weight that made me sit up a little straighter in my chair. "Michael," he said, pausing like he was bracing himself for what came next. "Did Vanessa tell you about the partnership account?" I frowned, confused. No, I have no idea what that is. What are you talking about? I said. There was another pause, longer this time, and then Richard began to explain. Years ago, he had quietly set up a joint account between himself and Vanessa. It was supposed to be for business expenses, tied to a small venture she had convinced him to start with her, importing rare specialty car parts for collectors. He said it had seemed like a good way to give her some real responsibility, something to manage, something to prove she could handle money wisely. He had kept it separate from the rest of his business accounts, and even from me, thinking it was simply between the two of them. But in recent weeks, something had changed. Richard told me that when he reviewed the account last week, he noticed withdrawals that did not match any invoices or purchase orders. At first, he thought maybe a supplier had switched payment methods or that Vanessa was securing new inventory. But the amounts were too large, too irregular, and the timing was suspicious. "Michael," he said in a low, steady voice, "this is not business spending, and it is not mine." His words were blunt, but there was no mistaking the meaning. I sat there in silence, letting it sink in. Even after the note she left that morning, even after the tens of thousands charged to our cards, some part of me had still believed she would draw the line at stealing from her own family. Hearing it from her father stripped away whatever hope I had left. "We need to meet at the bank tomorrow," Richard said finally. "I think we both need to see what she has been doing. With our own eyes." The next morning, I met Richard in the parking lot of the bank, just as the doors opened. He was already there when I pulled in, leaning against his truck with a look that told me he had not slept much, if at all. We walked in together, neither of us saying much, just the sound of our shoes on the polished tile floor. The bank manager, a middle-aged man with the calm smile of someone used to dealing with money problems, led us into a small office at the back. He had a laptop open and a stack of printed statements sitting neatly on the desk. "We pulled the security footage you requested, Mr. James," the manager said, glancing between Richard and me. He clicked a few keys, and the grainy black and white video filled the screen. The camera angle was fixed on the ATM room. Two machines side by side, a glass door leading outside. Then, clear as day, there she was, Vanessa. Designer sunglasses covering half her face, hair tied back in that casual style she used when she wanted to look effortless but put together. In her hands was a thick envelope, and as she turned toward the camera, you could see the crisp edges of cash peeking out. The manager clicked ahead, showing more clips. It was not a one-time thing. She came back again and again, always in the same glasses, sometimes in different outfits, but always with the same calm, deliberate movements. Not once, not twice, dozens of times over the last year. Each visit was a quiet theft, a slice taken out of the account without a word to anyone. It was methodical, almost routine, like she had built these withdrawals into her schedule. When the manager finally paused the video, Richard leaned forward, his jaw tight. "How much?" he asked. The manager slid one of the printed statements toward him. $180,000, he said plainly. The number hit like a physical blow. I watched the color drain from Richard's face. That money was not just sitting around. It was meant for payroll, for keeping his employees paid and his business running. Without it, the company was hanging by a thread. I sat back in my chair staring at the frozen image of Vanessa on the screen. I thought about the note she had left me, the credit card charges, the smug confidence it must have taken to believe she could do all of this and walk away untouched. But this was different. This was not just betrayal between a husband and wife. This was her stealing from the man who had trusted her enough to give her his name, his resources, and his faith. Richard finally looked at me, his voice low but steady. "She has been taking my business apart one withdrawal at a time, and now we are going to make sure she answers for it." Richard and I stayed in that small bank office for over an hour, going line by line through the account statements. At first glance, it looked like most of the damage had happened in the last few months, but as we looked closer, the pattern began to emerge. She had been bleeding the account slowly for much longer than either of us had realized. Small withdrawals, always just under the daily limit, spaced out just enough to avoid triggering any fraud alerts. It was subtle, calculated, the kind of theft that hides in plain sight until one day the numbers no longer add up. The manager pointed out that the earliest suspicious withdrawal went back almost a year. At the time, Richard had been distracted with a major supplier issue and never thought to question a few $100s missing here and there. But those few $100s had turned into thousands, and those thousands had turned into tens of thousands. By the time she began taking larger amounts, the habit was already ingrained. She had built herself a secret income stream out of the very trust her father had given her. I sat there, staring at the columns of numbers, thinking about all the nights I had stayed late at work, trying to get ahead, believing that Vanessa was at home, taking care of our life together. Meanwhile, she had been at an ATM, sliding a card into a machine and pulling out the money that Richard's employees depended on to feed their families. She had been quietly sabotaging not only me, but her own father's business. It was betrayal on two fronts, and the more I thought about it, the harder it was to decide which one cut deeper. Richard's face was set in stone as he looked at the numbers. He did not raise his voice. He did not curse, but there was a weight in his silence that told me he was feeling something far heavier than anger. This was not just about money. This was about the kind of trust you cannot rebuild once it is gone. Finally, he looked at me and said, "She did not need the money, Michael. She wanted the power, and she thought no one would ever catch her." I thought about the note she had left me, about her smug words that morning, claiming she had found someone worth her time. The truth was right here in black and white. She had not found someone worth her time. She had found ways to use people until there was nothing left. That was her pattern. And now, for the first time, we had the proof to stop her. Richard closed the folder, slid it across the desk toward me, and said, "It is time we take this to the next step." Richard did not hesitate. The moment we left the bank, he stopped on the sidewalk, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "I am pressing charges." His voice was calm, steady, but there was a finality to it that left no room for doubt. This was not going to be handled quietly within the family. He had made his decision. Vanessa had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. We drove straight to the police station, and Richard laid out everything: statements, withdrawal slips, and the security footage. The detective listening to him barely had to ask questions. The evidence spoke for itself. We worked closely with the bank and the police over the next 2 days, going through every withdrawal, every date, every location. The detectives wanted a full picture of her habits. When she withdrew, how much she took, what days she seemed to prefer. They were building a timeline, a map of her crimes that left no gaps for excuses. Vanessa had been careful, but not careful enough. She had patterns, and those patterns were exactly what would make catching her easier. The police suggested we wait. They explained that if we tried to confront her directly, she might run or hide the money. But if we let her stick to her usual behavior, they could pick the perfect moment to make an arrest. It was strange, knowing that she was out there, walking around with no idea that her time was running out. I kept my phone close, waiting for the call that would end this chapter once and for all. 2 days later, the call came. The detectives had been tracking her movements through her card activity. That morning, she had booked a wellness retreat at a luxury desert spa in Arizona. It was the kind of place where a single night's stay cost more than a month's rent, the kind of place she loved to flaunt on social media. She had posted a picture of her breakfast in the hotel restaurant before heading toward the spa lobby for her massage appointment. She never made it to the massage table. The detectives were waiting for her at the front desk. According to the officer who called me, she walked in with a smile, wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a designer tote. She was halfway through signing the spa check-in form when 2 plainclothes officers stepped forward, identified themselves, and placed her under arrest. She froze, looking around like she expected someone to step in and stop them. No one did. The lobby went quiet except for the clicking of handcuffs. When they led her out, she kept her chin high, but the shock in her eyes was unmistakable. She had thought she was untouchable. She had thought she was smarter than everyone else in the room. But in that moment, the game was over, and she was the one caught in the trap she never saw coming. The trial did not take long. In fact, I think it was over faster than Vanessa ever imagined. There was no drawn-out drama, no last-minute evidence that could change the outcome. The prosecution came prepared with a case so airtight you could feel the tension drain from the room as soon as they started presenting it. They laid out the withdrawal slips, one after another, each signed in her hand. They played the bank's security video showing her at the ATM, pulling out cash again and again. Then came the receipts from her endless shopping trips, resort stays, and high-end restaurants. It was not just proof. It was a story told in numbers and images. And the ending was inevitable. The part that seemed to hit her hardest was when her own family took the stand. Richard testified with the same calm, steady voice he had used when telling me he was pressing charges. He explained how the account was created to give her responsibility, how he trusted her, and how she turned that trust into a personal income stream built on theft. Her younger sister, Emily, spoke about the embarrassment and shame their parents felt, about how they had avoided telling extended family for months because they could not believe it was true. Sitting there, I could see Vanessa shifting in her seat, her confidence cracking just a little more with each word. The defense tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, claiming she thought she was entitled to the money because she believed it was part of her inheritance. But the judge was not buying it. The timeline, the amounts, and the way she kept each withdrawal under the radar told a different story. This was not confusion. It was deliberate, repeated, and calculated. The jury barely took a full day to reach a verdict. Guilty of grand theft. When the sentence was read aloud, 5 years in state prison and full restitution to her father, Vanessa kept her face still, but her eyes told the truth. This was not the life she had pictured when she walked out of our home that morning with her note on the counter. She had thought she could reinvent herself, step into some new life with no consequences trailing behind her. Instead, she was walking straight into a concrete cell with a number for a name. The moment that will always stay with me came after the sentencing. Richard looked at her as they were preparing to take her away. He did not shout or curse. He simply said, "You did this to yourself?" It was quiet, but it cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. The man she thought would protect her had been the one to make sure she faced every consequence. In that instant, Vanessa finally understood. No one was going to save her from the choices she had made. After the sentencing, life felt quieter, but not in the way it had on the morning Vanessa left. This was a different kind of quiet, one that felt like the space before rebuilding. I was sitting at my kitchen table a few days later when Richard called. His voice was calmer than it had been in weeks, but there was still a weight behind it. "Michael," he said, "you did not just lose a wife. You lost someone who was pretending to be a partner. Let's put your skills somewhere they matter." At first, I did not understand what he meant. Then he explained he wanted me to join his company, help stabilize the operations, and bring in some of the discipline and organization I had used in my own work. It was not just a job offer, it was a lifeline. I'd spent years managing logistics, keeping complicated systems running smoothly under pressure. His business was hurting from the damage Vanessa had done, not just financially, but in morale. Employees were shaken, worried about their future, unsure if the company would survive. Richard knew it would take more than spreadsheets and budgets to fix that. He needed someone who could restore order, rebuild trust, and remind everyone that the work they did still mattered. The offer was more than generous, but it was the respect in his voice that struck me most. I took the job. Walking into his shop for the first time as part of the team felt different from any other job I had started. People looked at me with curiosity, some with relief, as if my presence meant things might start to turn around. I kept my head down, learned the systems, listened to the people on the floor, and slowly began making changes. We streamlined ordering, tightened expense controls, and set up safeguards so that no single person could drain an account again. It was not about erasing the damage. Nothing could erase what had happened. But it was about moving forward. Richard and I grew closer during those months. We talked about business, yes, but also about life, trust, and the strange way betrayal can forge new alliances. He never spoke about Vanessa beyond what was necessary, and I followed his lead. The past was there, but it did not control the conversation anymore. We were focused on the future, The company began to stabilize, customers returned, and employees started smiling more. There was a sense of pride returning to the place, and with it came the quiet satisfaction of knowing we had done this together. Looking back, I realized that taking that job was about more than making a living. It was about reclaiming a sense of purpose after someone tried to take it away. Vanessa thought she had ended something when she left. In reality, she had set the stage for something stronger to grow in its place. And standing in that shop, working alongside Richard, I knew I had found where I truly belonged. Today, I am running operations for Richard's company, and the business is thriving again. The shop floor is busy, the phones are ringing, and there is a hum in the air that only comes when people are proud of the work they are doing. We have rebuilt the customer base, streamlined the systems, and restored the trust that Vanessa's actions once shattered. Every time I walk through the front door, I feel a sense of purpose that I had almost forgotten was possible. I'm not just clocking in to do a job. I am part of something that matters. Vanessa's choices cost her everything. Her marriage is gone, her freedom is gone, and whatever trust her family once had in her is gone as well. She traded all of it for the thrill of control and the fantasy of a better life with no consequences. In reality, she ended up in a prison cell with 5 years to think about every decision she made. I do not know if she spends those days feeling regret or resentment. But the truth is, it does not matter anymore. Her story is no longer mine to carry. What I learned through all of this is that revenge is not always about striking back. It is not about shouting or fighting or trying to make someone feel the pain they caused you. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is standing still and letting the truth do the heavy lifting. Vanessa created her own downfall step by step, and all I had to do was step aside and let her walk into it. Watching her face in that courtroom when the sentence was read told me more than any argument ever could. She knew she had done this to herself. Richard once told me, "People show you who they are when they think you cannot stop them." I think about that often now. The woman I thought was my partner was willing to burn down not only my life, but her own family's, just to feel like she was winning. In the end, all she did was prove the kind of person she really was, and she did it without any help from me. I carry that lesson into everything I do now. In business, in relationships, in life, I have learned that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. You do not always have to fight back to win. Sometimes the best thing you can do is live well, move forward, and let time expose what you already knew in your gut. And that is exactly what I have done. I did not have to get revenge. She walked herself straight into her own downfall. The best revenge I have ever seen was the truth taking its course, and I never had to lift a finger.